Hey there. Tonight we're heading south. Not for vacation, not for warmth. No, we're going to the edge of the known world in the early 1800s, where Britain sent its unwanted, its unlucky, and its inconvenient across the ocean and into the furnace. This is the story of the Australian penal colonies, one of the most brutal, absurd, and rum-soaked chapters in the history of punishment, disguised as progress. You're the main character, and you're not going home. Before you're crammed below deck with a few hundred coughing strangers and a month's supply of maggoty biscuit, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if grim bedtime history is your kind of lullaby. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I like to know who else is lying awake at night, quietly contemplating the horrors of imperial exile. Now dim the lights, settle in, and prepare to sweat, starve, and suffer your way into history. One blister, one lash, and one terrible cup of rum at a time. It wasn't supposed to go like this. You were supposed to pinch a handkerchief, duck into the crowd, and disappear into the fog like a particularly forgettable Dickens character. Maybe you'd even make enough by the end of the week to buy some bread that didn't smell like feet. Instead, someone shouted, someone else pointed, and the next thing you knew, you were face down in the mud with a constable's knee on your back, and a very self-satisfied grocer explaining how justice works to a group of unimpressed bystanders. At your trial, you're offered precisely two things: judgment and transportation. The former comes fast, guilty, obviously. The latter comes with a bit more ceremony. You're going to the colonies, not the nice ones with sugarcane and parasols. The other one, the new one, the big hot one, full of convicts and spiders and regret. Australia, you'll be contributing to the Empire's ongoing experiment in long-distance punishment. The judge doesn't look up from his notes when he sentences you. 7 years. Could have been worse, he says, as if you should send him a thank you letter from the bottom of the ocean. And anyway, everyone knows 7 years is just legal poetry. Transportation is rarely a round trip. You're not expected to return. You're expected to disappear, quietly, permanently, and in service of the Crown. No one cries at your sentencing. Your family doesn't have the money to attend. Or if they do, they pretend not to know you. It's safer that way. You're marched back to your cell, which you now understand was not in fact the worst place in the world. That honour is reserved for the thing that comes next. Because right now, even though you're filthy and cuffed and living off a diet of stale bread and suspicion, you are still in England. You are still on familiar soil, and that won't be true much longer. The days between conviction and departure are a blur of waiting, paperwork, and the slow realisation that everyone's already forgotten you. You're processed like livestock. They measure you, weigh you, log the shape of your ears and ask if you have any distinguishing marks. You lie, of course. They write it all down anyway. Some clerk scratches out your name on a sheet of parchment that smells faintly of mildew and failure. That becomes your identity now, a name on a list of the disposable. The prison is overcrowded. Of course it is. There are so many people like you, petty thieves, debtors, the unlucky, the unconnected. Some are hardened criminals, but most are just poor and desperate and caught at the wrong moment. You hear stories in the holding cells. Some woman says she was sent down for stealing a potato. Another says she was framed by her employer after refusing his advances. One boy admits he took a coat off a washing line. He's 13. You all share the same destination. No one explains the logistics. One morning, the guards bark your name, shove a crust of something vaguely edible into your hands, and drag you to the docks. That's when you see it. The ship. Long, black, rotting at the edges. You'd hoped the rumours were exaggerated. They weren't. It looks like a floating coffin with sails. A few other prisoners are already there, chained together like a string of unwanted pearls. You join the chain, and the cold iron around your wrists makes it clear. You're no longer a person. You're cargo. The dockside is busy but uninterested. Workers shout, crates slam, and no one looks at the line of convicts shuffling onto the gangplank. A priest tries to hand you a Bible. You don't take it, not because you're above superstition, but because you need both hands to keep your balance on the slick, creaking boards. The ship rocks beneath you like it's already trying to throw you off. You haven't even left the shore, and already your stomach is making threats. Below deck is worse than anything you imagined. It's dark, cramped, and smells like something died. Recently, violently, and in several stages. You're shown to your berth, which is generous only in the sense that it technically exists. You get a hammock if you're lucky, a plank if you're not, and a bucket for when your stomach decides it's had enough. You'll be here for months, maybe 6, maybe more. Depends on the weather, the route, and whether or not you survive. You're introduced to your shipmates. Most are in the same state as you. Filthy, terrified, and very recently reduced to property. There are whispers of what happens on ships like this. Sickness, starvation, beatings. Sometimes the crew goes mad. Sometimes the prisoners do. Occasionally, they both do at once. One man tells you that on his last voyage, 3 people died before the ship even reached the open sea. You ask what happened to the bodies. He doesn't answer. The captain doesn't speak to you. You exist below his notice, unless you act up, in which case you'll be brought up, whipped and sent back down with fewer teeth. The guards are bored and armed. Some drink constantly. Others look like they've never blinked. It's clear who's in charge, and it's not you. It never was. That night, you try to sleep. The ship groans around you like it's in pain, and every sound makes you flinch. You think about home. Then you remember you don't have one. Not anymore. You've been claimed by the Empire and sent off to its newest experiment in misery. You're not a prisoner. You're a foundation stone, a disposable one. And tomorrow, you set sail. The ship sets sail just after dawn, though you can't see it. You're below deck, wedged between 2 other convicts, whose names you don't know and don't particularly want to learn. Above you, ropes creak and boots thud as the crew shouts in nautical gibberish. Below you, rats hold their own parliament, seemingly unbothered by your presence. The air is thick, warm, and damp with the scent of 100 unwashed bodies, stale piss and brine despair. It sticks to your lungs and settles there, like mould in the walls of an old house. The first few hours are the worst, which is comforting because they don't stay that way. They get worse in new and inventive ways. Seasickness spreads quickly. You hold out longer than some, but by nightfall, you're dry heaving into a bucket you now consider your closest friend. No one talks much. There's groaning, coughing, the occasional scream, but not much in the way of conversation. Words take energy, and energy is something you now ration like food, which incidentally, you also don't have much of. Meals come twice a day, if you can call them that. Salted meat that tastes like it was cured in seawater, and regret. Ship's biscuit, which is essentially a stone pretending to be food, often with a few weevils baked in for extra crunch. Water, when available, is stored in barrels that haven't been cleaned since some previous war, and it tastes faintly of rust and whatever died in there last. Rumours spread that if the voyage runs long, they'll start cutting rations. You believe it. They already look at you like you're more of a burden than a passenger. Hygiene is non-existent. You share one slop bucket between dozens of men, and by the second week, you've developed a 6th sense for where not to step. Bathing is a luxury reserved for the rain, which doesn't reach below deck. Occasionally, they let you above to breathe something that resembles fresh air, but only under supervision. You are allowed to stretch your legs, as long as you don't stretch too far, because the guards have muskets and an itchy sense of discipline. One man sneezes without covering his mouth and is rewarded with the back of a rifle. The lesson is clear. If you're going to die of illness, do it quietly. Disease doesn't knock. It kicks the door in. Dysentery, typhus, scurvy. Take your pick. Some men start bleeding from the gums. Others develop fevers so high they hallucinate. You see one man try to climb a wall he insists leads to heaven. He dies 2 days later. They sew him into a sack and toss him overboard without ceremony. The splash is small. The silence afterward is smaller. You don't know his name. You don't ask. His spot is filled within the hour. Some try to keep themselves sane. They hum tunes, whisper prayers, recite the same stories over and over. One man counts ceiling beams. Another scratches tally marks into the wall until his fingers bleed. It doesn't matter. Time stretches and bends, shapeless and cruel. Days blur into each other, like the horizon. You lose track of how long it's been. A week, a month, a year. You've stopped dreaming. Sleep is a thing that comes in fits and stinks. When you wake, you're still on the ship. When you sleep, you're still on the ship. It never ends. Fights break out sometimes. Hunger, fever, claustrophobia, they don't mix well. A misplaced elbow turns into a brawl, which turns into a beating from the guards. One man gets lashed for stealing a crust of bread that was already half mould. Another is tied to the mast and left there overnight for insulting an officer's boots. The guards drink often. Rum is cheaper than water and twice as dangerous. A drunk soldier with a whip is not someone you want to meet in a dark corner of a rolling ship. And yet, that's exactly where you find yourself more than once. There are women on board too, though fewer. They're kept in a separate hold, for all the good that does. Their suffering is quieter but deeper. You hear them sometimes, crying, shouting, bargaining. You don't see their faces, they don't see yours. The ship is a world of partitions and silences, and the less said about certain things, the more everyone can pretend they didn't happen. Eventually there's a storm. Of course there is. The sky turns black. The waves rise like angry mountains, and the ship tosses you around like a child's toy. The lanterns swing wildly, casting monstrous shadows across the hold. You clutch a beam, a rope, another person, anything to avoid being dashed against the walls. Someone screams that the ship is going down. Someone else laughs, like it would be a mercy. You don't know which one to agree with. But the ship doesn't go down. It creaks, it groans, it leaks, but it stays afloat. You survive the storm, which is, according to the crew, cause for celebration. They pass out rum. It burns on the way down and doesn't help the vomiting, but for a few moments, everyone feels something close to relief. Not hope, that would be too generous, but a dull, drunken sense that death is taking a coffee break. Then the voyage continues. You are told you're approaching land when the rats start fleeing the lower decks. That's the first sign. The second is the smell. Less salt, more soil. When the ship finally drops anchor and you hear the word New South Wales spoken aloud, it feels fake, like a story someone told you in a fever dream. You can't believe the voyage is over. You can't believe you're still alive. Most of you made it. Some didn't. They'll be remembered only as missing ration portions. You've finally arrived. Not at freedom, not at redemption, but at land. The end of one kind of misery and the start of a hotter, dustier one. The moment you step off the ship, the sun slaps you across the face like a disappointed parent. You squint upward and immediately regret it. It's not just bright, it's hostile. It sears your scalp, bakes the tops of your shoulders, and dares you to survive it. You've known discomfort before, but this is something else. This is the kind of heat that makes your bones feel overcooked. The air is dry, but still somehow manages to feel sticky. It carries the sharp scent of eucalyptus, sweat, and something unidentifiable that you assume is death. You shuffle forward in a chain gang of equally miserable convicts, each of you coated in grime, blinking like moles dragged into daylight. A guard shouts something about forming ranks, but your legs have all the structural integrity of wet rope. A few people collapse. No one helps them up. That's not really the vibe here. You look around. The trees don't look like trees. They're tall and scraggly, with peeling bark and twitchy leaves that clatter in the hot breeze like they're plotting something. The ground is a confusing mix of dirt, rock and scrubby tufts of dry grass that seem to serve no purpose except being stepped on. And it's not green here, not really. It's more of a sun-bleached beige, like the whole continent has been left out too long and forgotten by God. You'd imagined Australia as a vast desert, which it is in places, but this bit is coastal, meaning it alternates between jungle humidity and open-air oven. The settlement itself is less colony and more collection of regrets nailed together. A few wooden buildings sag under their own weight. There's a flag somewhere, limp in the breeze, the Union Jack flapping like a resigned sigh. You see goats, you see chickens, you see soldiers sweating through their uniforms and yelling just to feel something. Everyone looks like they'd rather be anywhere else. Except you. You are anywhere else, permanently. As you're marched through the outpost, the guards point out the important locations. The storehouse, don't touch it. The barracks, don't go near it. And the punishment post, don't give them a reason, but they'll find one anyway. The local magistrate makes a brief appearance, mostly to glare at you and announce that you're now under his jurisdiction. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't need to. His sunburned scowl and wine-stained waistcoat say everything. And then there are the other locals, the real ones, Aboriginal Australians. You don't see many at first, just a few figures watching from a distance, half hidden in the trees. Their presence is quiet but deliberate. You feel their eyes on you, which is fair. You've shown up in their homeland, uninvited, shackled, diseased, and dragging an empire behind you. They don't look surprised, just disappointed and wary. You don't blame them. If the roles were reversed, you wouldn't want you here either. It doesn't take long to learn the golden rule of the colony. Everything bites, not metaphorically, literally. The ants bite, the flies bite. There are mosquitoes large enough to steal rations. Spiders the size of your hand hang in webs between trees like decorations in a haunted house. You don't even scream the first time you see one. You just nod and accept that this is your life now. One man gets nipped by something he can't identify and spends 2 days hallucinating before his arm goes black. They amputate it with a saw and a bottle of rum. No one asks questions. Night doesn't bring relief, it brings new horrors. The temperature drops just enough to make the sweat on your skin feel cold, and the air fills with the sound of chirping, buzzing, and skittering things you don't want to meet. You try to sleep on the hard ground, surrounded by strangers, wondering what's going to crawl into your mouth first. A beetle, a snake, or your own despair. You think about complaining, but then remember who you'd be complaining to. A guard with a hangover and a stick. Water is rationed, food is worse. You're given a bowl of something that might once have been beans. It tastes like wet cardboard and regret. The bread has weevils, but you eat it anyway, because you're too hungry to be precious. A fellow convict whispers that the trick is to pretend the weevils are seasoning. You laugh, then you cry a little, then you keep chewing. You ask someone how long you'll be here. They shrug. 7 years, they say, but it sounds more like a joke than a sentence. Some people never leave. Some people die before the year's out. You're not sure which you'd prefer. There's no plan, no path, no rehabilitation, just heat, labour, and a vague promise that someday, if you behave, you might be given a slightly nicer patch of dirt to die on. By the end of your first week, you've stopped trying to stay clean. You've stopped asking questions. You've stopped imagining this is temporary. You're not a person anymore. You're part of the landscape. Another grimy body trudging from one pointless task to the next. Another pair of hands to swing a pickaxe. Another mouth to feed or forget. You lie awake at night, staring at the dark sky, listening to the wind rustle through those alien trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dingo howls. Closer by, someone coughs, someone else cries, and a guard yells at both of them to shut up. The stars are bright, too bright, mockingly, bright, and as you drift off, you realise something unsettling. This isn't the worst part. This is just the introduction. You thought British law was bad back in England. You thought the guards at Newgate were cruel, the judges were indifferent, and the constables had all the compassion of a wet brick. But then you meet the wardens of New South Wales, and suddenly those days seem quaint, civilised even. Because here, discipline isn't about justice. It's about boredom, alcohol, and making examples, preferably loud, bloody ones. The men charged with keeping order in the colony are part of the New South Wales Corps, also known unofficially, and more accurately, as the Rum Corps. They are not soldiers in the traditional sense, not professionals, not trained peacekeepers, not men you'd want overseeing anything more complicated than a garden fence. They are cast-offs, veterans too violent for regular service, second sons with too much ambition and too few prospects, drunks, misfits, opportunists, men who found their perfect habitat, a place with no rules, no oversight, and unlimited access to booze. They don't get paid properly, which is part of the problem. Instead, they're given rum. Not as a bonus, as a wage, literally. Their salary's measured in gallons. The logic is sound by colonial standards. Why waste coin when spirits will do? Rum becomes the currency of the colony. It's how you pay debts, bribe guards, acquire favours. Need a shirt? Room. Want your rations not to mysteriously go missing? Room. Hope to avoid being picked for latrine duty in the middle of a storm? Room. Even justice, such as it exists, has a going rate, and it's flammable. As you might expect, a workforce fueled entirely by alcohol is not known for its nuance. These men do not hold meetings, they do not file reports. Their management style is swift, simple, and accompanied by the sound of a whip cracking through the humid air. If you talk back, you get flogged. If you don't talk enough, you get flogged. If you look like you're about to think about saying something, flogged. One man sneezed during roll call and ended up with 20 lashes for disturbing the peace. You see your first flogging within a day of arriving. The man's crime is unclear, possibly theft, possibly looking at the sergeant's hat the wrong way. He's tied to a wooden post, shirt ripped off, and lashed with what they call the cat o' nine tails. It's not metaphorical, it's a real thing. A leather whip with 9 knotted ends, each one designed to maximise pain and peel skin like old wallpaper. The sound it makes is not something you forget. Neither is the silence that follows. No one protests, no one even blinks. This is normal now. The guards don't wear uniforms so much as a collection of stains loosely stitched together. Their boots are cracked, their belts overloaded with keys and cudgels, and their hats, when present, are usually tilted at an angle that suggests long-term brain damage. Many are red-faced, not from sunburn, but from a combination of liquor and unaddressed rage. They carry muskets, bayonets, and the casual authority of men who've never once been told no and wouldn't listen if they were. They are not above petty cruelty. One guard throws a dead rat into the sleeping quarters for fun. Another forces a convict to sing for his supper, then throws the food at his feet anyway. A third has a hobby of carving tally marks into the walls every time someone faints from heat stroke. Keeps things lively, he says, smiling in a way that suggests it doesn't. Worse still is their paranoia. These men are surrounded by convicts, outnumbered, resented, and painfully aware of it. So they live with their backs against the wall and their fingers on triggers. They see conspiracy in every cough, rebellion in every murmur. A whispered conversation between 2 prisoners is grounds for a search. A missing spoon is cause for lockdown. They live in constant fear of revolt, which makes them twitchy, and drunk and unpredictable, a dangerous combination, especially when you're the one chained to a wheelbarrow. There is a ranking system among the guards, though it's mostly theoretical. Higher-ranking officers drink better rum, yell louder, and own slightly cleaner whips. One of them has a monocle, which he uses mostly to inspect bruises after a flogging. Another is known for reading Latin poetry aloud before sentencing men to a week in the stocks. Culture, they call it. Civilization, dragged ashore on a tide of sweat and liquor. You might think about appealing to one of these officers, maybe explaining that you're not a threat, that you're just trying to serve your sentence and survive. You'll quickly learn that empathy isn't part of the colonial training manual. These men didn't come here to help. They came here to rule, or more precisely, to drink themselves into power and lash anyone who disagrees. And anyway, the only appeal process is to God. And rumour has it, he doesn't answer letters from New South Wales. There are rumours whispered cautiously that a few guards aren't so bad, that some of them are just tired, stuck here like everyone else, trying to get by without going completely mad. You cling to that idea. You look for those faces, but the longer you're here, the more they blur together. They all carry the same whip. They all reek of the same bottle, and they all smile the same way when someone screams. By the end of your first month, you've learned the two unspoken rules of the colony. First, never look a guard in the eye. It's taken as a challenge. Second, if a man with a red face and a black hat starts singing before noon, find somewhere to hide, because when the rum runs out, the real punishments begin. On your first full day in the colony, you were issued your official prison attire. The word uniform is generous. It's not a suit. It's not a set. It's more of a concept, a shapeless, scratchy sack that vaguely resembles clothing if you squint and have low standards. The fabric feels like it was woven from the regrets of dead sheep and the floor sweepings of a textile mill. It's beige, not by design, but because everything here eventually turns beige. Your clothes, your skin, your soul. The shirt has no buttons, the trousers have no drawstring. The shoes, if you're lucky enough to get any, have holes large enough to let the spiders in. Everything smells faintly of mildew and desperation. You suspect your clothes were previously worn by someone who died in them, and no one had the time or interest to wash them after. But they do keep the sun off your back, which is the highest praise you can give them. Your sleeping arrangements are just as charming. There's no cell, no bunk, no mattress. You sleep where you're told, which is often just a patch of dirt under some rough planks or a leaky tent shared with half a dozen other men. If you're part of a work gang stationed in the bush, your bed is literally the ground, hardened by sun, soaked by rain, and alive with insects that view you as a late-night buffet. There's no pillow. There's barely a blanket. You try to bunch your clothes under your head, but the shirt's so rough it gives you a rash. The dirt isn't just where you sleep. It's where you live. It's in your shoes, your mouth, your hair. You dream in dust. You wake up coughing, not because you're sick, though you probably are, but because the wind kicks grit into your throat every other hour. You learn to sleep through shouting, footsteps, and the occasional fight. But the biting insects, you never get used to those. You're convinced they wait, until you're finally drifting off, just to remind you who's really in charge. Every morning the bell rings before sunrise. You drag yourself upright, your back aching, your legs stiff from the previous day's labour. There's no gentle routine, no quiet cup of tea, no stretching exercises in the courtyard. There's a shouted name roll, a threat of punishment for anyone who's too slow, and a slap for anyone who looks confused. You're given your daily rations, a slab of salted meat with the texture of leather and a crust of bread dense enough to stun a small animal. If there's porridge, it's cold, watery, and may or may not contain bugs. At this point, you consider bugs a source of protein. Then it's off to work. There's no discussion about your skills or background. No one asks if you're good with tools or have a bad back. You are a body, and bodies are assigned tasks based on how likely they are to survive them or not. You might be sent to break rocks, dig ditches, build roads, fell trees, or carry loads from one pointless location to another. Most of the time, you don't even know why you're doing what you're doing. You just do it until the sun's too high to stand. Then keep going anyway. The tools are blunt, the ground is unyielding, and the sun is relentless. Your hands blister, then split. Your shoulders ache with a dull throb that never quite goes away. You lose track of time, swinging a pickaxe or pushing a cart in a loop that feels like punishment without reason. Occasionally, someone collapses. The guards debate whether it's heat stroke or laziness. Either way, the result is the same. A kick, a flogging, or being left where they fell. One less mouth to feed. You're not allowed to talk while you work. Whispers are punished. Jokes are forbidden. You learn to communicate through glances and grimaces. At first, you try to keep your spirits up. Maybe make a few sarcastic comments under your breath. But sarcasm dries out faster than your mouth. After a few days, your humour gives up and retreats somewhere deep inside where the heat can't reach it. Hygiene is do it yourself. There are no baths, no laundry services, and no privacy. If you want to wash, you wait for the rain. If you want clean clothes, you scrape them against a rock and hope they dry before mould sets in. Most of the time, everyone just smells, a heady cocktail of sweat, dirt and misery. The guards don't care because they smell worse. And even if they did, what are they going to do? Fine you. You don't get time off. There's no weekend, no day of rest, no holiday for good behaviour. If it's not raining so hard the tools slip from your fingers, you're working. If it is raining that hard, you work anyway. Just with added slipping, falling and swearing. The only thing that varies is what part of your body hurts the most. Today, it's your lower back. Tomorrow, it might be your knees. Eventually, it'll just be everything. At night, you eat your second meal, a repeat of the first but colder and with more chewing effort, and collapse back onto your dirt pile. The stars overhead are beautiful, but you're too tired to care. You don't think about escape. You don't think about release. You think about how the sun will rise again. The bell will ring again, and the same cycle will repeat until your body breaks, or your sentence ends, whichever comes first. And as you drift into an uneasy sleep, covered in dust, sweat, and the vague awareness that a beetle is crawling across your ankle, you realise something. You miss prison. Real prison. With walls, with beds, with rules. Because at least in prison they didn't expect you to build the empire while starving in a sack. They don't tell you what you're building. They rarely do. That's not your concern. Your job is to show up, keep your head down, and move heavy things from one arbitrary place to another, while someone shouts vague instructions and occasionally threatens to beat you if your posture looks lazy. Today's task is straightforward. There is a large pile of rocks. Your assignment is to make a second pile of rocks somewhere else. That's it. You ask why. You're told to shut up. The other convicts don't question it anymore. They've been here longer. They lift, carry, drop, and repeat with the resigned rhythm of men who gave up hope several seasons ago. Some sing under their breath to pass the time. Some mutter to themselves. One man counts out loud, every stone, every step, as if math will protect him from madness. It doesn't, but it gives him something to hold on to. You quickly realise the colony doesn't just use forced labour, it runs on it. Every building, every fence, every godforsaken stretch of muddy road has been dug, hauled, hammered, or stacked by someone who didn't choose to be here. They don't call it slavery, they call it rehabilitation. But when your only reward for hauling bricks in 100-degree heat is the chance to haul more bricks the next day, the distinction gets blurry, especially when you're still in chains. The tasks change, but the feeling stays the same. One day, it's clearing brush with a dull axe. The next, laying gravel for a carriage road you'll never be allowed to walk freely. Sometimes, you're sent into the forest to fell trees, dragging the logs back with a rope tied around your waist like an ox. The rope leaves deep red marks across your ribs. You don't complain. Someone did that last week and got 6 lashes and a bonus shift digging latrines. The complaint system, you see, is also made of rocks. There's a strange sort of irony in it. You're helping to build civilization, literally. You pour the foundations, lay the bricks, dig the ditches. You're the scaffolding of progress. You hear the magistrates talk about how the colony is improving, how the infrastructure is growing, how trade is booming, how the Crown is proud of what's being accomplished here. No one mentions that most of it's done by exhausted men with bleeding hands and half-healed whip scars. You are reminded constantly that you're not part of what you're building. You're not a settler. You're not a citizen. You're not contributing to society. You are the labour, a thing to be used until it breaks, then replaced with another shipload of convicts. The very roads you're paving are meant for carriages that will carry your betters past you without a glance. The buildings you construct will never be your home. At best, you'll sleep in the dirt next to them. At worst, under them. And yet, there's a sick sort of pride that creeps in when you see something finished. A wall, maybe, or a barn. Something that didn't exist before your sweat soaked into the soil. You don't tell anyone. You don't show it. But there's a flicker of something. Not hope exactly. Just the faint sense that you still exist. That you can make something real, even in a place where you don't matter. The guards are, as ever, less than motivational. Their preferred form of encouragement involves yelling from a safe distance or flicking the end of a whip when your pace slows. They don't care what you're working on, as long as you're doing it faster. If something breaks, a wheel, a tool, a limb, they shout louder and expect someone to patch it up. Tools are reused until they splinter. People are treated the same way. Injuries are common and treated with indifference. A twisted ankle earns you mockery. A crushed finger might get you a bandage, if one's available. You see men with sunstroke, with infected cuts, with joints so swollen they can barely walk. The doctor, if you're lucky enough to see him, usually recommends rest, which no one can afford. And even if you could rest, where would you go? There's no infirmary, just more dirt and a slightly quieter patch of shade. Sometimes the assignments come from men who've never lifted anything heavier than a wine glass. Magistrates and officials who believe that forcing convicts to contribute to society is morally uplifting for everyone involved. They visit the work sites in carriages, point at things, and talk about legacy. You stand there, holding a shovel that's missing half its handle, and try not to laugh. Or cry. Either would get you punished. On rare occasions, you build something for someone important. A courthouse, a wharf, a fancy house on a hill. Those days are worse. There's added scrutiny, extra guards, special instructions that make no sense and contradict each other hourly. You dig a trench, then you fill it back in, then you dig it again, because someone changed their mind. Progress, it turns out, is mostly just repetition with paperwork. And through it all, you think about how much of your life is spent in service of something you'll never benefit from. You are the backbone of a colony that sees you as disposable. The physical embodiment of empire sweating in the sun, slowly coming apart at the seams. You wonder if anyone will ever remember who built all this. If one day tourists will walk these roads and ask who laid the stones. You know the answer, but no one will ask you. By the time the sun sets, your hands are raw, your back is screaming, and your legs have forgotten how to bend properly. You drop your final stone on the new pile and stare at it for a moment, wondering if anyone would notice if you just buried yourself underneath. Then someone shouts for you to line up, and the moment passes. Tomorrow, you'll build something else. Another wall, another road, another piece of a nation that's growing like a weed on top of your labour. You are a ghost, hammering your way into history, one blister at a time. You thought jail was bad, and to be fair, it was. The lice, the mould, the food that actively tried to kill you, all unpleasant. But what you had in jail, even if only in theory, was a system, a process, rights, however threadbare. Here in the colony, punishment isn't a sentence, it's a reflex, a language, a form of punctuation. The guards don't ask why something happened. They ask how many lashes it'll take, to make sure it doesn't happen again. You learn quickly that the definition of offence is broad and ever-shifting. Looking tired can be read as insolence. Slouching is seen as defiance. Whispering earns suspicion, and suspicion is as good as guilt. One man in your work crew drops a brick on his foot and yells in pain. A guard interprets it as disturbing the peace and has him flogged before he finishes swearing. There's no courtroom, no defence, no appeals board. There's just the whip and the man holding it. Flogging is the most common punishment. It's efficient, cheap, and very public. The cat o' nine tails makes regular appearances. Its leather strands stiffened with salt. Its knots designed to tear rather than bruise. The number of lashes varies. 20 for talking back, 30 for fighting, 50 for stealing, or for being accused of stealing, or for being nearby when someone else was accused. You stop trying to make sense of it. There is no ratio, no logic, only demonstration. You're forced to watch, always. That's part of the punishment, even if it's not yours. The condemned is tied to a triangle of posts or strapped to a wooden frame. His shirt is ripped, his back exposed. The guard delivering the lashes does it slowly, carefully, like he's painting. The sound is unmistakable. A heavy thwack, a sharp intake of breath, a soft wet sound as skin gives way. Blood sprays, flies gather. Sometimes the man screams, sometimes he passes out, sometimes he dies. If he does, they just leave him there until the body stops being a distraction. Chains are another favourite, not symbolic ones. Actual iron, cold and heavy. Ankle chains if you're unlucky. Full leg irons if you've annoyed someone properly. They jingle when you walk, grind when you work, and leave red welts that eventually turn into sores. You sleep in them. You wake in them. You dig ditches in them. Some men get so used to the weight, they feel strange when the chains are removed. Like something's missing. Like they're floating, unanchored. Some are assigned to chain gangs, travelling work crews used for the more unpleasant or visible projects. They're paraded through the colony like cautionary tales. You've been put on one once already. You wore your punishment around your ankles and marched through town with a dozen others, while children stared and settlers pretended not to. You were rebuilding a bridge that had collapsed last year. They say it was convict built. No one's surprised. And then there's solitary. In theory, solitary confinement is meant to give the prisoner time to reflect. In practice, it's a pit. A literal hole in the ground, dug into the hillside, or carved from old cisterns. Sometimes it's boarded over, sometimes not. There is no light, no bedding, no ventilation, just earth, stone, and the occasional rat that has long since lost its fear of people. The air smells of mould and something else you can't identify. You assume it's the residue of despair. You're thrown in for insubordination, which is to say, you asked a guard to clarify an order. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't even finish the sentence. Just the tone was enough. They hauled you off without explanation. The door slammed above you, and the darkness swallowed everything. You tried to count the hours, then gave up. You couldn't tell day from night. Your mind went strange after a while, twisting shadows into voices, your own breath into threat. You started talking to the rats. They never replied, but they listened. You were let out after 2 days, or maybe 3. It felt like longer. Your knees didn't work. Your teeth chattered. You couldn't stop shaking, even in the heat. The light hurt. The noise was unbearable. You thought you might cry, but your body decided you weren't hydrated enough. The guards laughed. They always do. To them, it's entertainment. A man broken is a man better behaved. There are worse punishments, of course. Some rare, some not so rare. The stocks, for example. Humiliation disguised as discipline. You're locked into wooden boards in the town square, unable to sit, stand, or shield yourself from the sun. Or the crowd. People throw things. Rocks, rotted vegetables, insults. Even other convicts. It's a public sport. You wonder if it's worse to be ignored or to be noticed. You hear stories about even darker things, secret punishments, guards who take men into the woods and return alone, women who disappear after a whispered accusation, a place upriver where they send the incorrigibles and no one comes back quite right. You pretend not to believe the stories. It's easier that way. After a while, the punishments blend into the routine. You work, you eat, you get beaten, you sleep. Not always in that order. It's not personal, it's structural. The system doesn't care who you are. It only cares that you obey, or at least that you look like you're trying. One wrong word, one wrong look, one wrong moment of hesitation, and you'll be back at the post, back in the pit, back in the stocks. You start to forget your own sense of right and wrong. You measure your days in bruises, not hours. You learn to flinch preemptively, to apologize for things you haven't done yet, to stay silent even when silence looks suspicious. You become a shape, a tool, a target. Punishment isn't the consequence of misbehavior. It's the background noise of life. You thought jail was bad. You thought punishment meant rules. But here, punishment is the rule, and mercy is a myth. If you feel the sun on your back without chains, if you eat without a bruise forming, if you sleep without screaming, you count it as a good day. Not a lucky one, just not the worst. Technically, this is a penal colony. It has governors, courtrooms, laws. There are flags flying, documents being signed, and sentences being served. On paper, it resembles a functioning extension of the British Empire. In practice, it's a rum-soaked fever dream run by men with too much power, too few morals, and access to a disturbing amount of alcohol. The New South Wales Corps, also known as the Rum Corps, controls everything that matters and everything that doesn't, including you. They're not just soldiers. That would be too simple. They're merchants, landlords, judges and enforcers all rolled into one sunburned, red-faced bureaucracy in boots. The British government, in a stroke of inspired negligence, failed to supply the colony with enough official currency. So the Corps filled the gap with rum, not as a temporary solution, as an economic system. Rum became money. Rum became law. If you want food, medicine, clothes, or a little less suffering, you pay in rum. If you don't have rum, well, sounds like a you problem. You don't see much of the good stuff. What trickles down to the convicts is watered down, cut with whatever was lying around, and stored in barrels that might once have been used to transport fish. Or worse, it tastes like varnish and makes your teeth itch. Still, it's better than nothing. A sip can dull the pain of a beating, take the edge off a fever, or knock you out cold on nights when sleep won't come. But even bad rum has value, and value means power, which means the Corps guards it like gold. They don't just distribute the rum, they own it. Every drop. They control who gets it, who doesn't, and who gets punished for pretending to have more than they should. The Corps decides which settlers receive shipments. They decide which officers deserve a cut of the good barrels. They even set the prices at the makeshift shops that line the settlement's dirt roads. And if someone opens a tavern without permission, it's closed. And by closed, they mean burned down. The military has uniforms, but here they may as well be costumes. The men of the Rum Corps wear their power like armour, not to protect, but to intimidate. You can spot them easily, broad-shouldered, swaggering, always slightly unsteady on their feet. Their belts hang heavy with pistols, keys and bottles. Their eyes are bloodshot, not from battle fatigue, but from last night's bender. If you smell sweat, gunpowder and regret, one is probably nearby. They don't take bribes, not officially. What they take are favours, gifts or preventative gestures. Sometimes they just take. It's easier that way. You hear of settlers having their crops seized for redistribution, which really means someone wanted potatoes with their hangover. You see convicts dragged off work duty to construct private homes for officers, then punished for not finishing fast enough. No one complains, not twice. Justice, such as it is, flows through this system of liquid currency. Trials can be influenced by rum. So can sentences. You see one man get off lightly after a theft because the magistrate happened to enjoy the rum his brother imported. Another gets 10 lashes for speaking out of turn after failing to contribute to the officer's personal stash. The difference between guilt and innocence isn't truth. It's the flavour profile of your connections. Rum is so embedded in the colony that even the governor has trouble keeping control. Occasionally, some poor bureaucrat from London tries to rein in the corps. They issue stern letters and tidy reports. The corps laughs, pours another drink, and continues doing whatever it pleases. One governor tried to ban rum trading entirely. The corps responded by ignoring him. Eventually, he was forced out. Turns out, idealism doesn't pair well with dehydration and overwhelming corruption. There's even a kind of black market network among the soldiers. A bottle disappears from the storehouse. A barrel spoils, but ends up behind a makeshift tavern. Convicts trade handmade goods for watered rum in chipped mugs behind latrine sheds. Everyone pretends not to notice, as long as no one gets greedy. The ones who do usually end up on latrine duty for a month or in a shallow grave, depending on the mood. And it's not just alcohol. The corps uses its power over rum to control access to everything. Blankets, tools, food, medicine. You're told that there are supply shortages, but somehow the officers always have fresh bread, clean shirts, and citrus fruit, which means someone, somewhere, is lying. You think about complaining, but then remember the golden rule. If someone can afford to drink every night and still walk straight, they're not someone you want to argue with. For convicts, the only access to this shadow economy comes through obedience or exploitation. Some try to earn favour, snitching on fellow prisoners, doing extra work, acting as house servants. Others trade what little they have, hand-carved trinkets, minor thefts, favours. And yes, sometimes themselves. Desperation turns rum into a bargaining chip more potent than gold. And the corps, they know it. They count on it. You learn to navigate it slowly. Not because you want to, but because survival demands it. You keep your head down. You watch who drinks with whom. You learn which officer favours silence and which one explodes at the wrong glance. You say thank you when given a shot of foul brown liquid, even though it burns all the way down. Because here, rum isn't a drink. It's a warning. It's a leash. And it's everywhere. By the time your third week ends, you've stopped asking who's really in charge. You already know. It's not the magistrate, not the governor, not the crown. It's the man with the biggest supply, the sharpest whip, and the strongest liver. This isn't a penal colony. It's a distillery with a prison attached. And as you lie in the dirt, dizzy from one too many sips of something that may not even be rum, you realise something deeply unfair. You don't even like the taste of it. You think about it all the time. Running, slipping away in the dark, maybe with a crust of bread tucked under your shirt, and a vague hope that freedom lies just beyond the trees. You imagine it during labour, while you swing your pick at yet another patch of pointless dirt. You imagine it at night, listening to the guards snore and the rats squabble. You imagine it so often that it starts to feel like a plan, even though it isn't. Because the truth is, escape isn't a plan. It's a death sentence with extra steps. That doesn't stop people from trying. They always do. The human spirit, apparently, is very stubborn, even when poorly fed and chained at the ankles. The first attempt you witness happens barely a week after your arrival. A man named Keenan, wiry and fast, makes a break for it, while the guards are distracted by a fight over a spoon. He disappears into the trees like smoke. No hesitation, no backward glance. It's almost inspiring. Almost. They find him 2 days later, covered in leeches and rambling nonsense. He hasn't eaten. He's forgotten how to speak properly. His hands are swollen with bites. His feet are torn up from running barefoot through brush that was never meant to be walked through, let alone sprinted across in a panic. They drag him back half conscious, and the next morning he's lashed in front of the whole camp. 75 lashes. Enough to make everyone stop wondering if it was worth it. It wasn't. Still, the bush whispers to you. Out there, past the last shack and the last shout of the guards, lies a wilderness so vast and untamed that no one truly understands it, least of all the people who keep trying to disappear into it. It's not just trees and rocks, it's a crucible, a place where the land itself seems to resent your presence. There are no roads, no signposts, just endless heat, towering gum trees, and noises that don't sound like anything you heard back in England. Some make it further than Keenan, a few vanish completely. When that happens, the guards assume they're dead and stop looking. If you ask around, you'll hear the word bushranger whispered in low tones, half fear and half awe. These are the ones who didn't just run, they stayed gone. They became ghosts in the wilderness, raiding outposts, stealing food, occasionally burning down a remote supply shed for reasons known only to them. You envy them in a way. Not their lives, those are brutal, short and filthy, but their absence, their refusal. It's not a good life, but it's a choice, and that alone makes it feel like freedom. Still, deep down, you know the odds. The vast majority of escapees don't become bushrangers. They become bones in the brush, food for scavengers, a cautionary tale rattled off by a bored sergeant whenever morale needs adjusting. The land itself is your jailer. It doesn't matter how fast you are or how clever your plan. Out there, the sun doesn't care about your sentence. It will boil the water out of your blood before you reach the next tree line. The insects are worse than the guards. The snakes are patient. And the spiders, you've stopped asking how they get that big. You've learned not to sit on logs without checking them first. You've learned not to reach into holes or brush against certain leaves, or drink from still water unless you want to hallucinate for 3 days, and then die face down in mud. That doesn't even include the soldiers. They love a good manhunt. Not because they care whether you come back, but because it breaks the monotony. They load up with muskets and rum, grab the dogs, and stomp into the brush like hunting aristocrats on a weekend retreat. If they catch you alive, it's for the spectacle. More often, they bring back your boots and say you resisted. No one checks. The worst part is knowing that if you did make it, if, by some miracle, you navigated the hellscape of Australia and survived without food, water, or being eaten, you still wouldn't be free. There's nowhere to go. The colony is isolated by oceans and guarded by paranoia. Any settler you approach would turn you in for a bottle of rum, or just for the satisfaction. Every face is a potential witness. Every village, a trap. So you don't run. You think about it, fantasize about it, draw invisible maps in the dirt while pretending to rest. But you stay, because you've seen the consequences and pain you can endure. Hopelessness, maybe not. You settle instead into the daily routine of slow decay. You watch new arrivals go through the same cycle. Shock, resistance, hope, defeat. Some still dream. You let them. Everyone needs something to hold on to, but you've stopped pretending. You know this place was designed to be escaped from, not out of. The system depends on that illusion. The idea that you could leave, even though you never really can. And still, every so often, someone makes a run for it. Usually, after a punishment. Usually alone. Sometimes it's someone you liked. Sometimes it's someone who never said a word. You watch them vanish into the tree line, moving fast, breathing hard. The very picture of temporary courage. And you hope, briefly, that maybe this time it'll be different. It never is. If you're a woman in the colony, the experience is different, not better, just differently terrible. The system wasn't built with you in mind, unless you count being assigned as livestock. You're not here to build roads or haul stones. You're here to be distributed, matched, offered, and, if you're fortunate, claimed. If not, well, then you become a problem. And problems get solved quickly in New South Wales. Upon arrival, you're marched off separately. The guards snicker more. Their gazes linger, You're told to freshen up before being presented for assignment, as though you're an hors d'oeuvre at a particularly grim banquet. There's no ceremony to it, just a line of men, settlers, soldiers, and administrators who size you up and try to decide if you're worth the effort. The only thing more disturbing than the process is how routine it's become, like choosing a shovel or a mule. They say women are in short supply in the colony, and that's true, if you're counting bodies. But in terms of power, influence, or autonomy, you might as well be invisible. You're not viewed as a person so much as a temporary solution to someone's loneliness, laundry, and libido. You can say no. Of course you can. You're just not expected to, and the consequences for being difficult range from being sent to work in the most miserable conditions to being assaulted in a corner no one bothers to monitor. The marriage market is absurd. A convict woman may be pardoned early if she agrees to marry a male settler, which sounds like a reprieve until you meet the candidates. Men who've been sweating in the bush for 3 years with nothing but wallabies and bad rum for company. They're not romantic. They're not polite. They're not subtle. Most just want someone to cook, clean, and not scream too loudly. You're told it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. You're told it's progress. You're told a lot of things. Sometimes you end up with someone passable. Not kind exactly, but consistent. Someone who keeps you fed and doesn't hit you too often. You build a routine around that. You learn his moods, his tells, his silences. You nod at the right times, laugh when expected, sleep with one eye open just in case. And if you're especially lucky, you get a small patch of land and a goat. You keep to yourself. You survive. And that, in this place, is considered winning. Other times, you're not so lucky. You're passed from man to man like a borrowed shovel. Or you're claimed by someone with power. An officer, a landowner, a man with clean boots and bad intentions. They tell you it's an opportunity, that you're being given a better station. And maybe on the surface, that's true. You sleep under a roof. You eat regularly. But the cost is high and always increasing. Your body is a form of currency, whether you spend it willingly or not. Some women resist, they fight back, they curse, throw things, scratch faces. They get punished. Not always physically, sometimes administratively. Sent to worse jobs, put on extra duties, labelled as troublesome. You don't want that label. It follows you, sticks to your skin like sweat. Once it's there, no man will offer you the illusion of choice again. Only the blunt certainty of control. Then there are the children. Some are born here, their mothers given a blanket and a nod before returning to work within the week. Others are dragged along on convict ships, tiny passengers on a one-way voyage to nowhere. If you get pregnant, it's your problem. If the child lives, it's your responsibility. If it dies, well, there are more where that came from. Compassion is not included in the colony's official supply list. And yet, within all this cruelty, some women manage to carve out small domains of power. Strategic flirting becomes a form of currency. You learn how to smile just enough, how to appear available without being accessible. You figure out who's useful, who's dangerous, and who's just drunk enough to protect you from worse men. You build alliances, not friendships. You trade favours, not trust. You live in subtext, in glances, in careful compliments, and calculated distance. There are whispered legends of women who rose above it all, who married well, ran businesses, became respected figures in the settlement. You suspect most of those stories are exaggerated or confused with someone else. But even if one or two are true, it doesn't change the rules for you. You're still here, still trying to survive a system that was designed without you in mind. Or rather, designed with only one use for you in mind. You don't cry often, not because you're strong though you are, but because crying doesn't help. It earns you nothing. It solves nothing. The dirt doesn't care. The men don't care. The spiders certainly don't care. You grit your teeth. You work. You obey. You lie when necessary and endure when unavoidable. Every now and then, someone disappears. A woman who just vanishes. Maybe she escaped, maybe she died, maybe she was given away and didn't come back. You don't ask. Because in New South Wales, asking questions is just another way of saying you haven't suffered enough yet. Eventually, you're sent beyond the fences. Not to escape, you're not that lucky, but to labour. The colony needs more land cleared, more brush burned, more things planted that won't grow. You're told it's an honour, or at least a sign of good behaviour, to be trusted outside the settlement perimeter. What it really means is they need more disposable hands to dig futile trenches in the wilderness. So you go, with a shovel, a rusted axe and 3 armed guards to remind you that freedom is still theoretical. Out here, the land stretches forever, dry, cracked and full of judgment. The soil is thin and full of stones. What little water exists is either brackish or already claimed. Settlers are scattered across the landscape, in cottages and huts, trying to summon life from a continent that clearly wants them gone. They glare at you from behind fences. You're not one of them. You're not even labour to them. You're a reminder of how fragile everything still is. The settlers don't have it easy. Most were promised opportunity, land, livestock, prosperity. They arrived with dreams and are now surrounded by flies and broken tools. Some try to be friendly, mostly the desperate ones. They might offer you a crust of bread or ask about your crime in a tone that pretends to be casual. Others keep their guns close and their greetings short. You don't blame them. You're a convict, a thief, a vagrant, a thing the government dumped into their backyard. Even if you wanted to be dangerous, you're too tired to try. The guards remind you constantly not to stray. The bush is dangerous, they say. You believe them, but they don't just mean the landscape. They mean the people living in it. The Aboriginal Australians, the ones who've been here since long before Britain decided this patch of earth would make a fine prison. You see them sometimes, watching from the trees, not hiding, observing, quiet, composed, and very aware of where they stand. This is their land. You're the intruder. And even though you didn't choose to come, that doesn't change the facts. You're not taught anything about them. Not their languages, not their customs, not their history. They're described with words like hostile and uncivilized, but no one explains what that means beyond vague warnings and bad stories. You're told to stay alert, told they might attack, but you notice something the guards don't mention. When trouble happens, it's always after someone crosses a line, after someone hunts where they shouldn't, builds where they shouldn't, cuts down trees that weren't theirs to take. You're caught in the middle, not part of the settlers, not part of the indigenous people. You don't belong to anyone or anywhere. You're just another extension of the empire's reach, dragged into someone else's land, someone else's fight, without even knowing the rules. You're not an invader by choice, but you're part of the invasion all the same. You feel it every time you swing an axe into a tree that stood for centuries before you were born. Every time you dig a hole for a fence post on ground that was never yours. Sometimes there's violence, a hut burned down, a shepherd found with a spear in his back. The settlers scream for justice. The soldiers respond with more guns, more marches, more blood. But no one talks about what led to it. No one asks why the fires start, why the raids happen. The answer is always assumed. It's easier that way. Just another day in the colony. Just another report written by someone who wasn't there. You meet an older settler one day while clearing brush near his property. He's missing 2 fingers and walks with a limp. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, he speaks about the land like it's a creature, alive, watching, waiting. He says the old ways made more sense, that the people who were here first knew how to live without fighting it. He laughs when you ask why he doesn't follow their ways now. Because the crown doesn't pay you to listen, he says. Then he spits into the dust and goes back to his fire. You think about what life must have been like here before all this, before the red coats, the ships, the chains, when people walked barefoot and named the rivers properly. You wonder how many lives have been torn apart by your presence, not just yours, but all of you, all the convicts, all the settlers, all the broken pieces of Britain's overcrowded cities, now scattered across a land that never asked for them. You think about how history will tell this story, probably with different words. There's a moment, brief and strange, when a child steps out from the edge of the bush and watches you work. She says nothing, just stares, her face unreadable. Then a voice calls, and she vanishes. You don't tell anyone. You don't know what it meant, but it felt like something. A reminder that the world doesn't revolve around you, that your misery, though vast, is not the only thing happening here. You go back to work, back to digging holes and hammering posts and pretending not to hear the gunshots in the distance. You don't ask questions. You just focus on surviving one more day in a place where survival is often the only thing left to aim for. You don't belong here. You don't belong anywhere. And yet, here you are, a pawn in a game you never signed up to play, waiting for someone to call checkmate. Eventually, people get tired. Not just the kind of tired that settles into your bones after a long day swinging a pickaxe, but a deeper exhaustion, the kind that comes from being treated like you don't matter for long enough that you start to believe it. There's only so much sweat you can wring from a body before it breaks. Only so many commands you can bark at someone before they stop listening. Only so many lashes you can deliver before even the threat of pain stops working. So the whispers start. Quiet at first, shared between convicts while pretending to sleep. Mumbled behind carts while pretending to lift. Whispers about fairness, about freedom, about doing something. Most are dismissed out of hand. Nervous jokes from men too sunburned to think straight. But every so often, the whisper carries weight. It sharpens, becomes a question. What if we said no? It's a bad question, a dangerous one. And it's also inevitable. The Castle Hill Rebellion, the one people will eventually write about in the history books, starts like this. A group of Irish convicts, most of them political prisoners from earlier uprisings back home, decide they've had enough. Enough whippings, enough starvation, enough guards too drunk to aim straight. They don't want to overthrow the government. They don't even want revenge. They just want out. And in a land this vast, escape feels like it might actually be possible if enough people try at once. So they gather, secretly, desperately. They pass messages rolled into buttons, scratched into the backs of spoons, whispered through fences. They count heads. They stash makeshift weapons, sharpened tools, heavy stones, stolen knives. They plan to seize a garrison, grab supplies and head for the mountains. There they imagine they'll build something. A free place, a better place. The specifics don't matter. The idea is enough. It's doomed from the start. The authorities catch wind of it before the first blow is struck. Someone talks, someone always does, maybe out of fear, maybe out of hunger, maybe because they wanted a shorter sentence and saw an opportunity. It doesn't matter. The rebellion unfolds anyway, ragged, chaotic, far smaller than planned. About 300 men manage to rally. They wave makeshift flags and shout slogans from home. Some of them are barefoot. Most have never held a musket. They march toward Parramatta, hoping to swell their numbers along the way. What they get instead is a professional military response. Well-fed, well-armed, and very sober. There's no dramatic battle, no glorious standoff. Just a sharp, brutal lesson in empire management. The rebels are surrounded, outgunned, and quickly outmaneuvered. 15 are killed. Hundreds are captured. The leaders are executed. The rest are dealt with, which in colonial terms means a creative mixture of flogging, resentencing, and slow public humiliation. The message is clear. Don't try this again. You're not surprised. Hope in the colony is like rain, rare, dangerous, and quickly followed by a mess. Most people here already understand this, They don't rebel because they're afraid, yes, but also because they know how this works. This isn't a revolution. This is a machine. Big, heavy, and built to crush anything that resists. It doesn't need to be fast. It just needs to be relentless. Still, the idea doesn't die. It just mutates. Some fight in quieter ways, slower, less noticeable. They sabotage tools, feed the animals wrong, delay construction projects. One man adds sand to the flour supply. Another, accidentally, drops timber into the river instead of stacking it. These aren't big gestures. They won't win any wars, but they're something. A way to say no, even if only for a moment. Others rebel in their own minds. They tell stories about home. They dream about leaving. They convince themselves that the sentence will end, that they'll become free settlers, that maybe their children will live normal lives. It's not rebellion in the traditional sense, but it's resistance, a refusal to let the system rewrite them entirely. You try to avoid thinking about it. You know better. You've seen how hope rots, how it opens you up, makes you fragile. It's easier to follow the rules, or at least pretend to nod when the guards bark, to keep your head down, to go through the motions and hope the day ends without a bruise. But every now and then, when no one's looking, the question still creeps in. What if we said no? It's not bravery, it's exhaustion, fermented into recklessness. But it doesn't last. Someone gets caught whispering, and everyone remembers what the machine does to squeaky wheels. After Castle Hill, surveillance gets worse. More guards, more inspections, more paranoia. The punishment for organising, or being suspected of organising, becomes swift and savage. It's not about prevention, it's about making examples. One man is chained to a post for a week just for passing notes. Another is hanged for incitement, which could mean anything from a full-blown speech to a particularly enthusiastic cough. And yet, the whispers always return. Not often, not loudly, but they never vanish. Because no matter how brutal the system, no matter how many bodies it stacks up, it can't erase the one simple truth that haunts every convict in every camp. This isn't right. You're not supposed to be a slave. You're not supposed to be a tool. You're not supposed to die nameless under a sun that hates you. And so the idea lingers, out there in the dust, flickering like a match in the wind. There are days when the routine cracks, when something different happens. A name is called, a door opens. A man is handed a folded piece of paper and told flatly that he's served his time. The guards don't shake his hand. No one claps. But the man doesn't get flogged that day, which qualifies as celebration. He blinks like someone emerging from a very long, very bad dream. Then he walks out of the barracks and into a different kind of prison, one without fences but with just as many rules. Maybe your sentence ends too, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're offered what they call a ticket of leave, a lovely euphemism for conditional freedom. It's not quite a pardon, not quite parole, and certainly not anything resembling a clean slate. It's more like a long leash. You're allowed to leave the settlement, you're allowed to work for wages, but only in designated places under approved employers, and only if you keep your paperwork on you at all times. If a guard asks for it, and you don't have it, or they say you don't, it's back to the stocks. Even with a ticket, you're still marked. People know. Your accent, your scars, the way you walk. It all says convict, no matter what the paper says. You're offered jobs no one else wants. You become a shepherd because sheep don't ask questions, or a cook because someone has to burn the porridge. If you're particularly unlucky, you're recruited into the military, because apparently being shot at by locals or French privateers is a suitable reward for good behaviour. Housing is up to you. If you're lucky, you get a corner of a shed. If not, it's a tent, a tarp, or just the open sky. You work, you sweat, you save what little coin they let you keep. You try not to spend it on bad liquor or worse company. Some manage to buy a bit of land or at least lease it. A few even start families, usually with women who also arrived in chains. two damaged people in a damaged place, trying to build something that doesn't fall apart before the next storm. But there's a catch, and there's always a catch. Even when you're out, you're not really free. You still have to report in, still have to follow the curfew, still have to explain yourself to anyone in uniform who decides they don't like your face. One wrong word, one missing document, one accusation from a neighbour who's had too much to drink, and it's all over. They yank your ticket, drag you back, and make sure everyone sees you in chains again. It's called reminding the others. You never stop watching your back. Not because you're planning anything, but because you've learned that safety is a temporary condition. You keep a shovel and a knife within arm's reach. You memorize escape routes, not because you'll use them, but because it helps to pretend. You avoid pubs full of soldiers, avoid eye contact with magistrates, avoid anyone who asks too many friendly questions. Out here, suspicion lingers longer than morning fog. Sometimes they offer full pardons, rarely. A sort of bureaucratic blessing that says, officially, you've paid your debt to society. You can leave the colony, they say. Go back to England, if you've got the means. If you remember where to go. If you think they'll let you in. But you don't. Not really. England's a lifetime away, and the money it would take to get on a ship is more than you'll ever see. So the pardon sits in your pocket like a relic, something sacred but useless. You meet others like you, men and women with empty pasts and uncertain futures. You recognise the way they hold themselves, always half tense. You share stories carefully, slowly. Sometimes you laugh, but only in short bursts, like your worried joy might get you arrested. You learn which settlers are safe, which aren't, who pays fairly, who cheats, who leaves bruises, who listens. You see men who adjust, who wear their freedom like a new coat. They build cabins, plant gardens, marry, pretend. Others don't do so well. They drink too much, talk too loud, get caught in bar fights, and dragged back. You learn quickly that the colony doesn't believe in second chances, just extended sentences. And then there are those who never leave. Not really. Their sentences end. Their chains are removed, but they stay. Not because they want to, but because they have nowhere else to go. Too far from home, too many ghosts, too tired to start over again. The colony swallows them. They become permanent fixtures, fence posts, shadows in the background. Eventually, no one remembers how they got here, just that they've always been around. You don't feel triumphant, not when your sentence ends, not when they hand you that slip of paper. You feel like a man being told he's allowed to breathe now, but only under supervision. The air still tastes like dust and sweat. The sun still burns, and the people who once whipped you now nod politely and expect gratitude. You nod back. Of course you do, because even a leash is better than a chain. But sometimes, when you're lying awake at night, listening to the wind rattle your tarp and the dogs bark in the distance, you wonder what it would feel like to be actually free, to walk wherever you want, to speak without permission, to leave, really leave, and not look back. But that's not how this place works. Australia is wide, endless, but freedom in a colony built on punishment never quite stretches as far as the horizon. You'd like to believe you'll get out, that your sentence will end, that you'll step off the worksite one day and never return, that the system, flawed though it is, has a conclusion. But the truth is most people don't leave. Not really, not cleanly. More often they reoffend, or they're accused of reoffending, or they're simply forgotten in the paperwork. In a colony built to extract labour from misery, the odds of leaving with your dignity, or even your name, intact are slim. Maybe you steal something, nothing major, a bit of bread, a shirt, a few nails from a supply cart. It's not greed, it's survival. But the guards don't care about context. Theft is theft. They read it off the charge sheet with the same dead tone as always, then double your sentence. The years stretch like taffy, sticky, uneven, and never-ending. Or maybe you don't steal at all. Maybe something goes missing near you, and someone with authority decides you look guilty. There's no need for proof, no trial in the sense you'd recognise. You've been here too long to expect fairness. They call it discipline, but it feels more like inertia. The machine grinds on, and you just happen to be caught in the gears again. By this point, you've stopped reacting to bad news. Another month, another year, you nod, you go back to work. You sleep on the same patch of dirt and eat the same rationed scraps. Hope is a foreign language now. It sounds nice, but you've forgotten how to speak it. You watch others reoffend too, not because they're dangerous, but because they've been institutionalized. A word no one uses yet, but one you understand instinctively. These are people who can't function outside the punishment cycle. They've been shaped by it, warped to fit the cell, the chain, the expectation. Give them a patch of freedom and they panic. Take away the lash and they don't know how to breathe. Some get themselves sent back on purpose. Others don't need to. The system finds excuses for them. You meet one man who was granted release, then showed up a week later, drunk and shouting at the gates. He begged to be let back in, said he didn't like the silence outside, said at least in here, you knew where you stood. The guards laughed. Then they beat him and re-enrolled him in the labour roster. Everyone pretended it was justice. The land keeps changing around you, but you don't. New buildings rise where tents once sagged. Roads stretch further. Farms spread. Officers come and go. Governors get replaced. But you're still here, swinging a pickaxe, sweating into the dust. Your hands have calluses where your fingerprints used to be. Your back aches before you wake up. You've stopped counting your age. No one celebrates birthdays in the colony. Sometimes you think about who you were before. A petty thief, maybe. A poor labourer. Someone with a name and a place in the world. Now you're just another face in a long line of grimy uniforms. They call you by your number more often than your name. You've answered to it enough times that you barely notice anymore. You see fresh arrivals and feel something strange. Envy. Not because they're new, but because they still have energy. They still ask questions. They still think this might be temporary. You watch them wear down over the weeks, the months, and you realise you're part of the colony now. Not as a citizen, not even as a prisoner, but as furniture, as background, as part of the structure that props the whole system up. You try not to think about the outside world. England is a fairy tale, a foggy myth. You don't know who's still alive there. You wouldn't know where to go even if you could get back. You've been in the colony for 10, maybe 15 years now. The sentence ended long ago. No one noticed. No one updated the books. You're still working, still reporting in, still being punished when convenient. You've stopped asking why. There are nights when your body gives out early and you lie staring at the stars, wondering if this is all there is. Not in a dramatic way, but just a tired one. You don't pray. You've tried that. God's jurisdiction doesn't seem to reach this far. Or maybe he's just not in the habit of replying to convicts. Either way, the silence above you feels absolute. The guards have changed. Younger now. Less drunk sometimes. But they still carry the same tools. Still bark the same orders. Still swing the same whip. The system hasn't evolved. It's just hired new faces to deliver the same sentence. You don't resent them. Not really. You're past resentment, past rebellion, past anything that feels like forward motion. The sun still rises, the lash still cracks, and you still wake up here. You no longer wait for freedom. You no longer expect it. You just exist. That, in its own strange way, becomes your rebellion. The refusal to break completely. You're still standing, still breathing, still present in a place that wanted to grind you into the dirt years ago. And some mornings, that's enough. One day, long after you're gone, long after your body has turned to dust and the buildings you helped build have been torn down, rebuilt, or turned into cafes, people will come here and treat all this like a museum. They'll walk through the remains of the barracks and squint at plaques. They'll pause meaningfully in front of the whipping post, frowning like it matters to them. They'll buy fridge magnets that say "Convict Strong" or "I survived the penal colony tour," and then they'll go get lunch. You won't be in the brochures. Your name won't make it onto the guided tour. Not unless it happened to survive in a ledger, or you did something unusual, like escape, murder someone important, or become governor, which is unlikely but technically possible. More likely, you'll be part of the statistical fog. One of the many, a smudge on a transport manifest, a half-erased entry in a punishment book, a silhouette in someone else's story. You are not a hero, you are not a villain, you were poor or unlucky or both. You didn't fight a war, lead a charge, or write a novel in your spare time. You worked, you suffered, you aged. You carried stones, built roads, survived floggings. You followed orders, and when you didn't, you paid for it. You had a name once, a family maybe, a home you barely remember. But in the end, you became part of the colony. Not as a citizen, not even as a person, but as a function. A unit of labour. A gear in the system. You are what history calls infrastructure. In 100 years, school children will write essays about the convict era. They'll describe it in neat paragraphs, with topic sentences and source citations. Words like transportation, rehabilitation, and colonial expansion will appear in bold. They will learn dates. They will memorize names of governors. They will mention harsh conditions and punitive measures, then close their textbooks and go back to lives that are largely free of rats, chains, and unsolicited whippings. No one will describe the way your skin blistered under the sun. No one will recreate the sound of a cat o' nine tails splitting flesh on a quiet morning. No one will assign a reading about what it felt like to cough blood into a communal bucket and then be told to get back to work. The story, when it's told at all, will be softened, flattened, turned into something tragic but admirable, something to feel vaguely sad about on a field trip. Some people, the romantic ones, will elevate the convict story. They'll talk about resilience, about how the colonies were built on the backs of the unfortunate. They'll light candles at historical reenactments and write folk songs about the brave lads who toiled and dreamed. It sounds nice, it sells tickets, but you'll still be absent from the narrative because you didn't dream. Not really, you were too tired. Others will turn your life into trivia. Did you know convicts built that wall, they'll say, sipping lattes in air-conditioned buildings? And they only got paid in rum, everyone will laugh. The same way they laugh about leeches in old medical books or tooth extractions without anaesthesia, as if distance makes it funny, as if the pain stopped being real once the ink dried. They'll visit your cell, the cleaned-up version, sanitised, swept, maybe with a reproduction cot and a plaque that reads, "Typical Convict Quarters, 1823. They'll take photos, post them online, caption them with things like, "Hard life back then," and add a crying laugh emoji. They'll walk out, thinking they understand something, thinking they've touched the past when all they've done is glance at it through glass. You won't haunt the colony. You're too tired for that. You won't be carved into history books or given a statue. You didn't do anything remarkable. You just endured. That was your job. That was the expectation. And in a world designed to forget you, endurance doesn't make a dent. Still, every now and then, someone might wonder. Maybe a curious teenager on a tour asks about the unnamed. Maybe a descendant stumbles across your name in a crumbling record book and wonders who you were. Maybe someone lights a candle for all the unmarked graves. It won't bring you back. It won't change what happened. But it's something. A flicker in the dark. The land remembers more than people do. Somewhere in the dirt, your footprints linger. The road you helped build is still there, buried under concrete and asphalt. The walls you stacked have been patched but not replaced. Your body might be gone, but the effort remains. You gave years to this place, and even if it never gave anything back, it absorbed you. You became part of it. whether you wanted to or not. And as for the rum, it didn't help. It burned going down. It blurred the days. It numbed the pain sometimes. But it didn't save you. It didn't make you free. It didn't keep your name on the books or your story in the archives. It was just one more tool the system used, not to comfort, but to control. So no, you won't be remembered. Not really. But you were here. You lived through this. And whether or not anyone puts your name on a plaque, that fact, brutal, quiet, unadorned, is enough.